Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. And Tom, it's brilliant to have you with us today. So to kick off, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the great work that you do.
Thanks, Alan. I appreciate being here. I'm Tom Rausch. I'm the Director of Consulting at Barrett Values Centre. Our work is to transform business and the business paradigm so that more people can thrive by living their purpose. And love my work, love the Values Jam, and looking forward to our time together today.
So, Tom, just share a little bit more about Barrett Values Centre, because I've known you and Barrett Values Centre for quite some years now, and it's a fascinating organisation because it's a network of consultants and a consultancy itself, right?
Right. Yeah, we operate primarily in the world through our network of consultants. We've trained thousands of people over the years, and then they take our analytics tools, which are based on Richard Barrett's values model, 7 levels values model, which looks at all of the levels of values that are important to human beings. It's based on Abraham Maslow's work on the universal human needs that we all have, from the foundational need to survive and need to be loved and need to be good at something, all the way up into the more mental and spiritual aspects that people are really feeling the pull to these days, even in the workplace, the need for meaningful work. Things like that. And with our analytics, anybody, whether it's our independent consultants or whether it's people inside of large organizations, can assess their entire system and find out what's important to the people in the organization, what values really resonate with them, what values are they experiencing in the culture today, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then the beauty of the Barrett assessment is the third question asks, what values do we need to live into to reach our full potential? And the wisdom of the system always knows how to heal itself. So that's really the power of our culture assessments. And then we have leadership assessment, well-being assessments. And if you triangulate all of that data around human needs and what the people in the system need to thrive, it makes it much easier to consciously steer the culture to align with the strategy so that people can thrive. And transforming the business paradigm is about making sure that thriving is for all of society and the environment, not just, the shareholders in the organization.
Great, thanks, Tom. I mean, it's always struck me that it's that kind of data-driven conversation starter that is so valuable, because in the values space, that's kind of few and far between to find.
Right. We like to say we make the invisible visible, and we're leaning into calling them human-centric KPIs right now. Business always is looking at key performance indicators. And we say, those are great. We need to look at profit. We return on investment. We need to look at all the traditional indicators, or we won't be around long as a but if we really lead and manage, serve the people in the organization and serve the major stakeholders, whether they're customers or employees, that's when we truly thrive. And the data tends to show that organizations that do that consciously strive to not just be best in the world, but best for the world, that those organizations typically outperform, the standard organization by about 3 to 1 on almost every measure of success.
Yes. Cool. Okay. So let's get into our values jam. So what I'm going to do, tip out the cards. Let's make sure they all come out. And then if you could tell me how many times you'd like me to cut the deck, please.
I've thought deeply about this. It needs to start with a 3.
So do you want 3 piles or 4 piles?
3 piles.
Okay. And now I've got 1, 2, and 3 in front of me. Which one?
Number 1.
Number 1. So that's actually the shortest. So I've got 2, 4, 6, 9 cards. A number between 1 and 9?
That'd be 3 again.
Okay. Ooh, this is going to be fun.
Security.
Security. Now, that was the reaction that I had, I think, when I saw it. But now I've
Yeah.
started to think a bit more. So to kick off, what does security mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Yes. So to me, being in my field, I immediately jumped to psychological security, right? I also flashed on like locks and keeping your home locked up and safe at night. So I think security very closely, I would say, associated to a feeling of safety, but it's maybe even just a bit more than that, right? Because it's not only do I feel safe in the moment, but somehow I feel protected, perhaps. Some of what that is, and then in the workplace where my mind typically goes, it's like, am I secure in speaking up, telling my truth, being able to show up as who I am? And if I have that security, I thrive. So even though security, in many people's thinking, and even in maybe our 7 levels model might be the number one most foundational value, if you have that, it can free you up for much higher senses of belonging and inclusion and meaning in life. So really an important one.
Yeah, and like you, I kind of had those two things going on at the same time because I had like locks and doors and stuff like that, and prison type environment, and then also the psychological safety and peace. And just listening to you talk about safety and security is making me wonder what the difference is, because, like you suggested, I think there is a difference, but actually, I'm not really sure what it is. So perhaps we can play with that for a bit.
Sure. What would be the difference between safety and security? Well, and I guess as I think about it, it's maybe more of the long term. So safety means I have a roof over my head. Security means I've paid rent for the month, or I don't have a mortgage on it. So, to me, there's a bit more of a permanence to security, whereas safety might be a bit more momentary. That's one thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. And I was thinking about like security of tenure or security of employment, when it's like you might feel safe to speak up, or not feel safe to speak up, but you still do it because it's kind of a momentary thing. But if you're scared of losing your job, then that's a
Right.
different matter.
Which that triggered something for me, thinking about where do you place your security, right? So if I place my security in holding the job, and the boss who has the control over whether I'm employed there or not and can terminate my employment, then that's going to lead me tend to not be fully present, to not speak up, to not bring my full self to the situation. Whereas if my security comes from within, and I'm like, I love this, even if I love this job, I am secure enough in my own resilience and my own ability to provide for myself, that I don't need that job. It's actually kind of funny because now that we're talking about this, I'm thinking about all my friends who, I think, boy, you would be perfect to go into some kind of entrepreneurial endeavor, especially at this point in your life. And you really don't need the security of a job now that your situation has changed. You ought to think about doing your passion, what you love. And time and again, they go back to a job for the security. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting because of the other thing about that particular example that you've given is that sometimes I think people kind of don't understand the level of security they need or don't need. So it's like this thing about, oh, well, I earned this much, and so I need a job that pays that much. And actually, you might not.
Yeah.
And this is making me want, because when we started this conversation, I was thinking about security in a very positive way. and thinking, surely security is a good thing. But actually, when you raise this point of where do you place your security, it opens up a whole new world, because sometimes people have said to me, you don't seem to care what you say. You just you just say it as it is, type of thing.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, well, yeah, why would you not do that?
Yeah.
But if you're not secure, you might not actually feel that you can do that.
Yeah.
So security in yourself, I think, is this big difference between being secure financially or security of a job, because in those situations, you're looking for that security extrinsically, rather than it being from within.
Right. And both are critical, right? I mean, one of the things we saw in COVID times at Barrett with our data that we collect from people about how do you feel about your job, that need for security, that kind of level one, everybody was concerned about their health. Nobody knew what was going on. This invisible thing can kill me, right? It brought a lot of us down to a very basic, animal instinct of survival, and will I survive, and the fear of that, and that I could get sick just by walking down the street or, taking public transportation. So that is an interesting thing. And I think there's an interesting interplay between the security inside of yourself to believe that you're resilient enough, but also there is a security thing in the belief, and I think this gets to a belief as a value of, is the universe a loving, safe place to exist, right? So if you are a person like me who believes that the universe is a loving, safe place, it makes it a lot easier to have internal security, right? And to believe that I can lose this job and I'm still going to be fine. I'm going to find a way to get on, and all of that's going to happen because I have a generalized faith that the universe and there's a loving God who's having impact, and there's grace in the world, and there's mercy in the world. And I tend towards believing that those things exist, and that provides me great security, even when I'm looking around the world and strife has never been more, great, and people have never been in more disagreement here in the States, at least. So is that interesting piece too, is.
And it's also, you mentioned COVID, and another value that received a lot of attention there was the whole well-being thing, right? Because people became much more aware of it than they were previously. And I think security falls into a similar category. It's one of these where there are some values that we don't really value until we haven't got them, or until they're under threat.
Right. Yeah, you get dropped in a war zone and you're going to have a whole different experience of how secure you feel. And that you bring up well-being, even our new well-being assessment, we look at two primary factors: is security provided by the work environment, right? Because if you feel your bosses trust you, and you're encouraged to speak up, and you're encouraged to call out if you see something wrong going on, that you can speak up and be rewarded for that rather than punished for that. So that environmental workplace security that gives you that psychological security that I'm going to be okay here. But there's also your personal resilience. So that's the other big piece of it, is you and I can be in the same environment. If you have much higher personal resilience skills, you're going to operate, with security. If I have low resilience skills and I'm buffeted about by the winds of change and the ambiguity and the uncertainty in the world, I'm not going to have that near that level of well-being that you are, even though we're in the same environment.
Yeah. And talking about the workplace, you've also reminded me of I don't know whether this is true, actually. It might be one of those urban myths, but it was a merchant banking firm, and it was one of their senior people who said, we hire high performing, insecure people, and then we keep them like that for as long as we can.
Yeah.
So insecure is the opposite of secure, right? So there's that play as well, because there is another saying about, if you're too comfortable, you don't perform as well as when you're slightly uncomfortable. So what's this relationship between performance and security / insecurity, and what's the right balance?
Yeah. And I think you hit on it. Is if complacency falls in, and so the question is when does over security or complacency fall in, and I'm not high performing anymore, right? So that is fascinating about the insecurity and the driven person. And I've done a lot of my work over the last 15 years or so with consulting firms who could have been said, not just your merchant banker, could have been said, are high performing, high achieving, insecure people who, are willing to work our long hours and work themselves to death. And actually, the consulting industry has been one of the most greatly impacted by the quiet, not the quiet quitting so much, but the great resignation. People just saying, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, and I think it's the difference of whether you have fear-driven behavior, which is in that first description, or whether you have purpose-driven behavior. And that's actually one. I have a friend who taught me how to do purpose coaching, and he always said when you coach people to understand their deeper purpose, their life changes, because most of us up until the point where we discover some kind of our own internal driving purpose that gives us meaning to life, is that we are doing things mostly out of need to fulfill our basic needs, to achieve, to have money, to do all the things we want to achieve in life. And that is at its base fear-driven behavior. And if you think like most of capitalism and religions and armies have been set up, it's been set up, to cater to that command and control, fear-based, fit in, and you can be part of the team, don't fit in and you're out. Once that's gone, because you've discovered something higher, if you have something higher, then that becomes your new motivation. But if you've just given up on the fear-based behavior and don't care anymore, and you haven't connected to your higher purpose, that's when complacency might set in.
Mm. So let's
that's tying a lot of concepts together, but that's where it went in my mind.
Yeah, I think that this happens all the time with ValuesJam, and I think it's partly because these values words, we generally don't explore them. We don't talk about them. We just use the word security, just loosely and freely, and we don't actually think it through, because if we did, like now we've just spent how long already? 20 minutes, just at the beginning of this. So let's get a bit practical now. Where have you noticed a lack of security?
In myself or in my environment, or
whatever comes to mind first, Tom?
Well, sadly, I hate to bring this up, but sadly, where my mind went with that was, here in America, we have mass shootings all over the time, and a lot of those have been occurring, sadly, in grade schools. People going into the most vulnerable, and that's a word people use all the time here: security, right? Yeah. And we've got the gun enthusiasts and gun rights people saying, well, the only way to secure this is we've got people saying, arm the teachers, go give a gun to every teacher in every classroom, and that's security. Well, I mean, to me, that's insecure thinking, that's insecure behavior, that's fear-based behavior, that is grasping for security as an external thing, as a way of to me, there's no self-awareness there about, because to me that's insane to think that that's somehow making the situation more secure, when so that it is, we have to have a definition of what's normal, what's safe, what, when we get into talking about security from that sense of the word, how do we make our public spaces safe and secure? That then goes right to, well, what do we believe? Do we believe the universe is a good place? Do we believe that the world is filled with homicidal maniacs? And we also believe that they ought to have access to guns. So, I mean, it's you're making me feel less clear now with our discussion. You're not making me feel, I'm feeling less clear now as I really look into what really is security.
Well, it's making me think as well, that example that you're talking about there, whether it be a school or whether it be some other sort of public space, it feels like there's a difference between the feeling of security, which is what you want,
Yeah.
and the function of security, which is some of the stuff that you do,
Yeah,
in the name of achieving this feeling of security. And the two don't necessarily go together in terms of what people do and the way it makes people feel. And just one more thing that popped into my head before I forget. I saw a report of, it was a guy saying that his daughter had come home from school. She was 8, I think, something like that. And he said, "What did you do at school today?" And she said, "Oh, we had a gun drill."
yeah,
And it was just like normal. And I just remember thinking, that is so sad that an 8-year-old little girl, it's a normal part of her life to be doing a drill in case somebody comes into the school with a gun. How is that right?
yeah, yeah. It's I have 2 daughter-in-laws who are both school teachers, one high school and one's in grade school, and yeah, they have to do the active shooter drills. And it's of course, back in our day, we used to hide under your bomb, like that was going to do it. I don't know if they did that in the UK, but in America they had us diving under our desks in the 60s once a year to simulate there was a nuclear attack from Russia.
Wow. Well, I'm just trying to think back to my example. Oh yeah, so the example that I was going to give was, so when I've noticed a lack of security, it was when I worked for an investment bank and I was in the corporate services, so facilities management part. So our job basically was to provide great service in the offices, right, for the employees of the bank. And there was a downsizing, so a redundancy layoff program. And wow, didn't people's behavior change because they were fearful of losing their job? And I just remember people like saying really dumb things and putting colleagues in, not a good place because they felt that it's either them or me. And it was like, isn't there a metaphor about when the scales fall off? It's like this, you were a nice person yesterday, and now why are you all of a sudden this different person? It was really
Right.
quite weird.
Right. And to me, what I try to remember, so I'm just thinking about security. If you're lucky enough to be in an environment like we have been, where, first world country, and, most of your basic needs are fairly easily met if you need to apply yourself, as opposed to being born in parts of the world where that's not possible. But when you have an environment that's relatively secure, then how quickly do you mature so that you have security inside of yourself regardless of whether your environment changes, right? Because that's always the test of a leader and of somebody who's going to show up the way you want them to show up. It's a test of our best corporations. I remember you know the conscious capitalism movement, which is pretty big here in the States. And there's a guy named Bob Chapman who co-wrote a book with Rausch about everybody matters, right? And he talks in that book about the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, and how they managed that by taking the issues to, open book financials and going to all of their teams and saying, how are we going to get through this? And some people raised their hand and said, you know what? I can take a year sabbatical without pay because Sally over here needs the job, needs my hours. And so by the team coming together, because he handled it in that way, he provided security for everyone in that organization. So there's both the maturity of a leader who can stay calm and look to continue to create a secure environment but they're creating that by the security in themselves. They're creating that by their belief that that we will get through this together, and that people are basically good, and that if you trust people to work together in price, you'll get through it together. And that comes not from the outside circumstance, that comes from how much resilience you've built up inside of yourself, how much security you've built inside of yourself.
Yeah, and there's something here, again, going back to your example of schools and guns and all of that sort of stuff. It's like sometimes the people or the body with the power and the authority, maybe they're not the best people to actually put in place the stuff to create security. Instead, they should be creating an environment for the people that exist within it to decide what needs to be done. So it's then, the teachers, for instance, rather than telling them this is what you have to do, it's like asking them, what do we need to do?
How do we do this?
Yeah. Okay. And then the other side of the coin, where have you experienced security?
Well, I'll give a plug to my current employer, because when Barrett Values Centre called me up, I'd been doing culture work and leadership work for years using the Barrett tools before Barrett called me up a couple of years ago and said, hey, come on in and help us, grow the company and make a bigger impact. And I'd been a lone wolf. I'd run my own companies. I'd done a couple businesses on my own. I was the boss, right? And it was really kind of strange going back into a place where I was getting a regular paycheck, that I wasn't the one signing my own paycheck. And I had to learn to trust again. I had to learn to both look at the structure I was in and learn to be secure within it, and figure out, I was always secure as Tom, the entrepreneur, Tom, the person who ran his business. But now I had to find a way, can I be secure again as Tom, the team player, as Tom, the contributor to this bigger place. And we are walking our talk at Barrett, and we're really working on creating that cohesion, that psychological security, that mutuality and responsibility, and really helping people find meaning in their work. And I never had that at any time in my life to that degree, because in my early corporate work, I was always that achieving, fear-driven achiever, right? Who the bosses were getting more and more out of. Then I said, no, corporate world, bye. I'm tired of that game. And I went and achieved myself. Yeah. And then I had all of the fear of, we grew a company and had employees, and all of a sudden it's like, I'm not feeding one family, I'm feeding, 27 families, and, making payroll. And so I never had that kind of security there, because I had no safety net, right?
Yeah.
But I learned the confidence and skill set there. But then coming back into a truly caring, loving environment, and it's not just hugs and kisses. It's also, there's also a lot of mutual accountability and how are we going to do this together? And certainly it's a crazy world out there. And just like every other business, we're trying to figure out how do we adapt? How do we change? How do we grow? What are we going to do about AI? What are, all of the, uncertainty in the world, but I've never felt more security because I have a team of high performing, competent individuals who are doing the best they can to work together as a team. And I never really had that. Even in the corporate world, there would be pockets of high performing teams that I would, work with, but there was, so much of the other stuff too.
Well, lucky you.
Well, some might say it's karma. Some might say it's 50 years of getting it wrong, so you can finally get it right. I don't know.
But my example is kind of the opposite in a way. So you remember I mentioned the bank that I worked with. Well, a guy that I worked with there, he moved to another firm, and I went to see him after he'd been there for about 3 months, I think it was. And he was explaining to me how awkward he felt. And I think this came into my mind because you talked about, a change of context or a change of environment and the impact that has. And what he said was, when he arrived in this place, people were too nice. And he said, I was like, this guy said to me, what can I do to help you, to help you settle in? And because he had been used to a pretty toxic environment previously, he was thinking, so what do you want from me? and so there he grew into it and he loved it there, and it was a very secure environment. But actually he didn't see it as secure initially. He saw it as absolutely the opposite, which is a bit weird.
Yeah. Well, it's why if we grow up with dysfunctional families or, and most of us have some kind of shame and betrayal and abandonment, coming out of our family, that it's our natural survival instincts as animals to look at the negative and to be concerned about security. So, this is a growth and evolution and maturity thing. I think we all have to go through. And, like I said, if we're lucky enough to live in, we live in the most remarkable of times. I'm so happy to be alive right now and to see what's going on, despite, the fact that we're, potentially at a precipice never before seen in humanity and the planet. We also, have we have the capability, I believe. And one of the things that I continue to work on to help provide security, both to myself and to the BBC and to the world, is, can you share a positive story about the world being a loving place and solutions, being just around the corner if we embrace our higher selves while still admitting, the world is on fire and we have precious little time to move forward. So finding that balance and way to communicate to people to both, I guess, harness the fear of, if we don't do the right thing, we can really be in trouble here. But really, it's got to be the pull to the solutions are there. And I guess that's what makes me feel most secure is, not only have I come to understand human beings as, while deeply flawed at their very heart, loving, open, generous, human beings, and that's what the connection of life is all about to me. But that we've come so far and our knowledge has become so great that we have everything we need to solve the world's hunger problems, to solve every one of these, UN SDGs 17 goals behind me. It's all there. If we could just get people to feel the inside security that they don't need to act in greedy, corrupt ways, right?
Yeah, and you've just answered the question that I was going to ask next, which is how could more security improve the world?
Yeah.
And you've kind of started to touch on it, but this is an area that I find fascinating. And I use a metaphor of imagine aliens in a spaceship visiting us, right? So they're up there above the planet, and one says to the other, "Hey, look at what's going on down there. See over there, there's loads of wealth. Look at all of that going on." And the other one says, "Yeah, you're right, but they're wasting quite a lot of it, aren't they? And then look over there, there are people that are starving to death,
Yeah.
and there are other people that haven't got clean water and no medicine. And who's running this show?" And then the first one says, "Yeah, you're right. Let's report back. No intelligent life form here. Keep looking." So coming back to security, I let me venture an opinion about this, and it's like if people everywhere in the world, every single person had a minimum level of security in terms of shelter, food, medicine,
Right.
water, then how could the world not be a much, much better place? And like you said, why can't we do that? Because we do have the resources to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting, when you look at, Richard Barrett continues to do work on studying like the evolution of mindsets and where humanity is going, and his humanity awareness index, consistently shows that it's mainly the Nordic states that have the highest happiness, the highest global thinking, the most security, places where there is food security and there's health security, and you know we know it's an achievable task, but we also know it's tied to uh, very core human values of things like freedom and justice and equity, right? And
Yeah.
the inequity that you were saying the aliens were noticing is part of the problem,
And
right?
do you think that the world, do you think that citizens in this world can ever all be secure when we don't run it like that? We run it, on a country by country basis. There is no joined up thinking really at a
Right. Well, and you look at the critics of the UN would point to their, limited success that they've had. But at least we have a UN, and there's some success going on. And I think evolution is happening so fast that we make a mistake if we look only to the past and say, well,
Yeah.
this has not worked before, because I do believe we have shining examples. It's just like in business. We have shining examples of extremely well-run organizations, and then we have organizations that continue to operate like Jack Welch, Neutron Jack, leave the buildings but kill the humans inside of it, right? And so I do think I have hope that we will get there, and part of it is the technology and the way things are changing so rapidly, because we're so all interconnected now because of the internet. You and I having this conversation, this is a conversation we could have had 20 years ago, right? Not like this, at least. I think that all of that is speeding up so much that it's going to, and what we're witnessing is the collapse of the old structures that don't work,
Yeah.
and the birth of the new structures that will, and what that looks like, and I will say that I agree with Ziggy Marley. We're all one human race. That love is my religion. We all are one human race, and that in the end, that interconnectedness is what's going to save humanity. The recognition that we are all one. Now, what that looks like from a governance structure, Ireland will always be Ireland, and Alabama will always be Alabama. But things are going to change for that better, I believe, and I think technology is going to drive some of it, because the cost of everything is going down to zero. The cost of energy is going down to zero. The cost of food is going down to zero. And so money's becoming less important, actually. Doesn't seem like that, right? I do think there's so much happening at the structural level that is going to make changes happen that we can't foresee, and that I'm certainly not smart enough to foresee, but I believe it's happening. I sense it in my bones.
And actually, just listening and thinking about this global level that we're on now and security, it's the cyber security that is going to be so important, because potentially that's the new battleground, right? But, it won't be necessary to fight wars anymore if you can just unhinge a country through cyber invasion, or whatever you want to call it.
Which also then points back to the internal resilience and evolution of people to recognize what's true and not, recognize when somebody's gaslighting you or you're getting the truth, recognize if your politicians are serving you or serving themselves, right? So I do think there's a lot more chaos, and a lot more institutions are going to dissolve, and maybe some will be blown up, but but I think it's inevitable. Well, there's a group called Rethink X who does really good, future, the changes that are coming in all of the major sectors. That's where I was getting my information, that the cost of everything. And with that happening, this interconnectedness that you and I feel on this call, and that I even feel with the people who are watching this, 30 days from now, 60 days from now, that interconnection is what's going to save us, I think. The heart-to-heart interconnection. And sometimes I wonder if, I work in trying to change large organizations, but I also know the power of individual transformation. And that anybody working on themselves and bringing us back to security, anybody who's working on their own resilience and bringing security into their heart, typically is finding, they're called to, because when you look inside yourself for your security, you find a open, warm heart that is connected to every other open, warm heart in the universe. And to me, that feels like God and love and some kind of universal connecting source. That's going on. And I don't think stop that. I don't think that evolution of man is actually speeding up.
Mm-hmm. And you're making me think now about how security is easier in a slower paced environment, or an environment that is less dynamic, because you can latch on to something, you can know that it's going to be like this for a while, and that whatever is in place is going to be fit for purpose.
Yeah.
But because we're change is just like exponential at the moment, and we don't know how long things are going to be around. So it used to be that, let's take, you've reminded me of a guy that I met at a wedding, and we just introduced ourselves, and I said, what do you do? Normal question. And he said, well, I'm retired, but I was an accountant for 40 years, and I hated every day. And I felt so sorry for this guy. But anyway, the point that I'm making is that he acquired some knowledge 40 years before, which kind of served him for a lifetime of employment, right?
Yep.
Whereas today, the knowledge that we have today is kind of redundant tomorrow, perhaps.
Yep.
And so there's something about security at different levels. And I keep coming back to what you said right at the beginning about that inward or internal security, helping you to navigate the change, to put in place the things that make the environment secure and make people feel secure. But it starts on the inside of you.
Yep. It starts with loving yourself and being able to search inside yourself and get over whatever childhood wounds you had about shame and abandonment and that we all suffer. And then once you can start to love yourself, the more you can love yourself fully, then the more you can love your family, your friends.
All right. So how do we make the people that are trying to give teachers guns more secure on the inside so they don't want to be doing such stupid things?
Yeah, it's I think what it is, and this is where I wonder where the tipping point is, right? So if at some point there's the idea of the 100th monkey, or at some point a that idea was that when a monkey learns to use a tool on an island, once 100 monkeys have done it, the entire population knows how to do it. And so people who say we've got more people meditating for peace right now. I'm a member of a year-long intention class, and we're getting together and holding intentions for people's personal healing and things like that. I really believe that those kind of individual awakenings are how that happens. And when you doing purpose work, people come to that at a certain time, and those times are typically when they have some kind of crisis in their life. They get divorced, they lose the job, whatever. So it also often is an arrow to the heart, right? And ideally you can come to purpose, you can come to a new way of thinking, but sometimes it's at a funeral, or sometimes it's at that's what it takes. And so and maybe it's just enough people at the school board, enough parents showing up at the school board and saying, no, we're not going to be bringing in more resource officers, we're not going to be arming the teachers, we're going to pass laws that re-outlaw these killing machines, these AR-15s that were designed for war and have nothing to do with what the founders of the Constitution said was a well-armed militia for the security of the state, right? So I think at that point of view, people get swept along, and then that security can happen.
Yeah, and I think you're right about this, people taking action, doing what they want to do. So I've started to get into the world of education over the last probably 18 months or so. And there are now alternative models being created because the old system is not fit for purpose. But instead of putting up with it, people are now doing different things. Now, that's a positive step. However, if we look at another example, and you've mentioned the division in the US, it's not much different here in the UK. And the UK government has recently put legislation through which gives the police the right to stop protest.
Yeah.
And specifically if it's too noisy. How funny is that, right? But so what we've got is a system that is kind of identifying that maybe people are feeling more able to be more voiceful and forceful, and then trying to counter that with more extreme legislation. And if you look at the increase in popularity of some of the far right political parties through Europe, that's kind of a bit of a trend that seems to be happening as well. So there's a really fine balance here between the old system and the desire for something new and different.
And of course, everything's speeding up, and I keep going back to that evolution happening faster. So if you're, besides being a student of Barrett 7 levels model, I'm also a student of spiral dynamics, right? And so there in the US, we have these groups. So we still have some red tribal thinkers, and some of what you're pointing to is going all the way back to that red thinking that it's my tribe, it's my nationalistic tribe. But really, most people in modern society are called blue thinkers, which are the loyalists, the religionists, the people. Life as a test to be passed and won. right? And my reward is in heaven. Well, against that came orange thinking, which is no, life is not a test. It's a game. It's a game to be won. And let's, that's the capitalists of the world. And then green thinking came in opposition to that and said, oh, you capitalists are destroying the earth. You're not, let's hug the trees. It's not a game. It's a family of man. We're all one, right? And then came yellow and teal thinking, which is where those of us who, point to that, those are the first, that's a new revolution that's not in opposition to what came before, right? So the uniqueness of this next level of thinking and next level of consciousness that we're moving into as humanity is able to transcend and include and not have to be there in opposition to what was. However, because we've still got red and blue and orange and green going on, we still have this, but as more of a shift into yellow and teal type thinking and behavior, that's going to shift. And because science and technology are helping to drive the changes to societal problems, it's happening faster and faster than ever before. So the internet and what happened in the early 2000s was a big shift, but we're about to go through some other, huge shifts where we've become so digital, we're overserved on that, and people are starting to not look for the unique bespoke solution that's exactly to me. Now they're going to start using technology to interconnect and to find ways to live in harmony. So I see this spiral being fueled by all of these other things in the ecosystem. That's what gives me hope that we're just seeing the crumbling of the old as the new is being built up.
Are you familiar with I think it's the 4 turning points? So it's generational thinking.
Yeah, all the generational, yes.
Because what that's saying is that we are between 2008 and 2030 something is basically the crisis. Things are going to just fall apart and need to be reinvented. So like you said earlier, you're so happy to be alive at this time. It is a fascinating time to be here. So I'm conscious of time, Tom, and we've got one final question that we need to just think about and answer. So to finish off the Values Jam, what are you encouraged to do differently about security as a result of our conversation?
I think the conversation was very helpful to me because it helped me hone my thinking around this, and this whole, helped me try to verbalize what I've come to believe and understand is my own internal security, but also looking at the externalities of what the ecosystem is doing. And it's going to continue to make me want to hone my messaging around it and how I talk to people about it and find the questions that get to the point of what you said earlier. How do you help fear-based people who don't see the security inside themselves? How can you ask questions or offer challenging thoughts that challenge them to find more of that security inside themselves?
Okay, and if I can just push you a little bit on this, what's your first baby step towards doing that? So what's the first practical thing that you can do?
One of the things one practical thing I could do would be, I've been thinking about organizing my various ways of framing these arguments, right? So there's story, there's metaphor, there's all of these things that I use that I haven't put them together. I haven't documented them all in one sheet of paper, and I haven't thought about how I use those puzzle pieces. So this conversation has made me say, let's put some of these puzzle pieces on a paper. Let's look at where they fall, and then maybe that will really help me. as I move forward with, future messaging that I do and things that I bring to our network of people to help them drive these conversations of positive change to more security. Yeah.
Great. And mine, I've got two actually. So one is that this conversation has reminded me to when things are wobbly, things around you are happening that might make you feel less than secure, is to just remind myself of the strength of the security inside so that you are able to more easily deal with that stuff and just keep it in perspective. It's like, just deal with it. It's not the end of the world type thing. And then the other thing is a request of you, actually. You mentioned your intention class, and I'd be interested to know a bit more about that. So if you're able to either point me somewhere to learn more, then I'd appreciate that. So, Tom, you're a values jammer now. Thank you so much for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Fantastic.
Cheers.
Thanks, Alan. Cheers.